Welcome into Vandy on SI. I'm Joey Dwyer. He's Dylan Tovitz here for our Monday show. And Dylan, uh, because of what happened last week on an individual level, I think we've got to go with a Tyler Tanner show today. He's the thumbnail, and he's been good enough. He's been enough of a star, transcendent enough to make us believe that this is the Tyler Tanner show. Have a big feature coming out about him tomorrow, which will be Tuesday. So check that out on the site. But Dylan, first of all, before we get into some nitty-gritty stuff, contextualize how good Tyler Tanner has been, the numbers among the best in the country at his position.
Yeah, I mean, he's been, really, really remarkable to start the season. And I think, we expected to an extent this kind of, leap from him. I think he showed these flashes last season, but I don't think we were quite expecting him to be, you know, frankly, one of the better guards in the country, which is what he's been so far. I'm just looking at his stats. He's averaging, 17.3 points per game on 29.8 minutes, 5.4 assists, 2.6 steals, just 1.8 turnovers. He's shooting 51.4% from the field, almost 86% from the free throw line, and nearly 39% from three, Joey. I mean, those are legitimate numbers right there. And I think, the eye test has been even better. His presence on the defensive end has only gotten better. I think we talked about it a lot during the Bama game, but his on ball defense I think has been pretty special, and that was what we saw last season. But he's looked like, as much as he's been great on the offensive end, he's been just as good on defense, and he's really emerged as a leader in the locker room. I think Byington's spoken about that a lot. So this is a guy that's slowly blossoming, or really quickly blossoming, into one of the better guards in college basketball, Joey, and he's showing no signs of slowing down, in the sense that, he's only improved so far this season, and people are starting to talk about him in NBA draft circles, and I think, honestly, he's naturally limited by his size. I think, especially when you start to talk about, the NBA. But I think outside of that, he's done everything he possibly could with his prototype and his skill set. He's become a much better finisher, a much better shooter, and the question was, can he always had the defense. He always had kind of the work ethic, I think. The question was, can he provide enough offensive value to be a true, combo scoring guard? And he's answered that with a resounding yes so far. He revamped his jump shot a bit, and his finishing ability. That's what's impressed me most, honestly, that the quickness on the way to the basket. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but not only does that, create buckets for himself, but when you collapse the defense there in the interior, that's how you find your open shooters. And especially with guys like, Jalen Washington and AK Okereke being at least possible threats to shoot the ball, you're really making it hard for opposing defenses. So that's kind of what I've seen from him so far, Joey. But it's been really a pretty special start to the season for Tyler Tanner.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess kind of what sparked this is the last week, Tyler Tanner scored 50 points combined in Vanderbilt's two wins. I thought was the best player on the floor in all of them. And maybe that changes if LeBaron Philon didn't have the cramping issues, things along those lines. But I mean, he went for 29 points against Alabama and then 19 against LSU. Not quite 50 points, but I mean, 48 points is basically 50 points at this point, Dylan. And I just think he's so dynamic. And after the Alabama game, I've kind of made it an intention to basically follow him around whenever he's in Memorial Gym throughout the week, just for that feature, and try to get some different looks at him playing in specific. And when I was sitting behind the basket on the visitor side on Saturday, I think I gained a new appreciation for really how dynamic he is. Like, if you want to stop Tyler Tanner from scoring or at least creating, you probably have to stop two or three drives per possession. And I don't know that I really grasped how quick he is with the ball in his hands. I think that's something that NBA evaluators really won't get a look at until they see him in person. I think that's a big deal and a big piece of his game. Like, he is truly dynamic going downhill. And maybe he's not the most physical guy around the rim ever, but I think the way he's able to contort his body and just be able to use angles and things along those lines is among the best in the country. And as we're looking statistically and we're looking at how a guy impacts his team, I don't know if there's many better point guards in the country. I think Braden Smith's better. Braden Smith's going to break the NCAA assist record at some point this season, I would guess. Jeremy Fierce from Michigan State maybe has a little bit more of an impact than Tanner does. And I think Bennett Sturts is a little bit different of a player, a more dynamic scorer than Tyler Tanner is. Those would probably be the three guys that I would look at and maybe put above him at this point. But I mean, Dylan, it just in terms of the way that he makes this thing run and just how dynamic of a player he is and how dynamic he'd be in any situation, I really don't know that there's many better players in the country.
Yep.
And I don't know that there's a better point guard in the league than Tyler Tanner is right now. He's not going to win a whole lot of national awards just because of how good Braden Smith is and because of how good Jeremy Fears is at Michigan State. But I mean, if it was a different year with some point guards that hadn't been in college basketball in the same system for 3 or 4 years, I think you're not counting out Tyler Tanner out of any award that's on the table. And you're looking at guys like Donovan Dent who got paid, who got millions of dollars, and Tyler Tanner is just completely outpacing them. He's one of the best guards in the country at this point, and I really don't think there's any disputing it. I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from the week, and I was almost ready to go there before that week, but seeing that performance against Alabama and seeing him put up 20 points staying near against LSU without his best or anywhere near it, I think we're ready to have that conversation now.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to contextualize a little, I'm looking right now at Evan Mia's BPR metric. It's, in my opinion, the best kind of overall player rating system in college basketball. It's he actually explained it to me and a few others at some point. Mia did how it's calculated, and he ran it through. It's basically a Bayesian kind of regression that takes into account like offense and defense and like a gazillion different factors. Takes into account team strength and team efficiency and tempo and all that stuff. And right now he is sixth in the country, Joey, and that's in the player rating. Mia has both a player rating and a team rating. Um, and he is only behind. Here I'll read the players ahead of him. It's Yaxel Lendenborg from Michigan, it's Cameron Boozer from Duke, it's Braden Smith from Purdue, it's Joshua Jefferson from Iowa State, and
Mm.
it's I'm probably gonna fumble this name, AJ Dibansa
Yeah.
from BYU. And then it's Tyler Tanner, and so I think Braden Smith's the only guard there. So, and that is obviously you're factoring out any sort of SEC bias that might exist, any sort of Vandy bias that me and Joey don't have, but if we did, then that we're saying Tanner's better than he is. That's just strictly by the analytics, and the analytics say he's the second best guard in college basketball right now. And that's a system that doesn't just it evaluates basically there's a preseason prior and then it updates as the season goes on. So, you know, that's that's a pretty damning statement, I would say, in favor of Tanner and what he's done for this team. And I think it's because he's maybe he's not as big of a volume scorer as some of these other guys. He's not putting up maybe 30 a night, but every single night he's doing a lot. He's passing the ball. He's playmaking for his teammates. You know he's really making an impact on the defensive end. Him and Duke Miles are two of the. I think Duke is ahead of him, but they're two of the highest. Best in the conference in steals per game. Um, and they're truly making an impact. And I think we're right now, if the season were to end, I think Tyler Tanner's an All-American and or at least close to it. And yes, there's a lot of competition for that. There's a lot of good players in the SEC and there's a lot of good players in the country, but Tanner has given us no reason to believe he shouldn't be at the very least in those conversations, if not at the top of them, Joey.
Yeah, maybe the assist numbers aren't what Smith and Fears are, but I look at it and I say his gravity and just the attention that he takes up, the way he impacts the game is among the best in the country. And maybe it's a tier below Braden Smith, but I mean, he's in the ballpark. He's in that conversation at this point. And Duke Miles even told me he thinks he's the best point guard in the country. Obviously, we'll take that for what it's worth, considering Duke Miles is his running mate in the backcourt. But at that point, when a teammate says that, you're generally thinking, "Oh, bias aside, like he's got nothing to do with his point." If Duke Miles really wanted to, he could legitimately make a point that Tyler Tanner has a chance to be the best point guard in the country by the end of the year, or that he should be in that conversation. I mean, that's a big deal in a lot of ways. And we heard the same thing about Ezra Manjon from his teammates. Ezra Manjon was really good. Tyler Tanner is a next level player and a player that you have to worry about going to the NBA at this point. Who would have thought? And just to contextualize the leap here too, he was a catch and shoot guy for a lot of last year. I was looking at some of his numbers. He had like, let me look at the game logs here, but the amount of games where Tyler Tanner scored in double figures last year, I mean, it would be stunning to you to hear how few of them there actually were.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think people have kind of gone along with the idea that, I mean, Tyler Tanner was good last year. Yes, I mean, he was good. He was a good defender last year. He was always on the court. I hit some big shots for them down the stretch. But here's a stat, Dylan. Tyler Tanner didn't score in double figures in SEC play last year.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a leap. The closest he got was nine against A&M, nine against Georgia, seven against Kentucky, and the only games last year in which he scored in double figures were New Orleans. He had 16. Vanderbilt scored 100 that night, um, and 14 against Cal, which was really his coming out party. And I talked to Adam Mazzari, who recruited Tyler Tanner that night. He's a Cal assistant now. And he basically told me Tyler Tanner's next up. He's the next Garland. He's the next Saban Lee. And I looked at it and I was like, really? Like, Tyler Tanner's good. He's a three-star recruit from Brentwood, though, and he was just a catch and shoot guy that night. He was guarding Cal, one of Cal's better guys. But when you're watching that, you're not thinking Tyler Tanner's an All-American candidate the next year. You're thinking he's probably the starting point guard next year. They found their point guard, but maybe bring in some competition like a Frankie Collins and maybe ease Tyler Tanner into it a little bit. He doesn't need that now. He's one of the best guards in the league. And along the lines of the gravity thing, Dylan, here's what the story is about. Tyler Tanner is one of Nashville's own. He's a player that a lot of people identify with. He's got a seemingly endless line of people asking for pictures and autographs and things along those lines. I think Tyler Tanner has embraced that really like no other player has embraced that at Vanderbilt over the years. I think just about every kid who comes to Memorial Gymnasium has a Tyler Tanner autograph at this point. Every local community member has met Tyler Tanner, and I think he is as good of an ambassador as this program could possibly have as this at this point. And I don't think that should be lost either in the era where fans consistently talk about how they don't know the players. Tyler Tanner is as recognizable a player as Vanderbilt has had in recent memory, and by the end of the year, he might be as big of a star as it's had in recent memory.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about last season, and to call it as it is, Joe, he was pretty bad offensively last season.
He
His jump
was he was
shot.
barely a threat to make threes. Like you had to
Yeah,
guard him out there a little bit, but
exactly. His
I
jump
mean
shot was very raw.
he had to revamp it. He had to make it quicker. He had to get more arc on it. That was the point of the offseason, I think.
Yeah, and he did that. And Tristan Rutman over at the Hustler did a feature on him a couple days ago. Basically, he started it by saying, there's a good point that you hear so much about this sophomore slump, and maybe it doesn't apply as much to basketball, and maybe that's more of a baseball thing, but I think it does. And it's like your second year, the league understands you a little bit now. They have tape of you, you know, and then you slump a little before you kind of readjust. And he's done the exact opposite, and that's not easy to do for a lot of players. But I agree with you, Joey, on the idea of the fact that he's a hometown kid. Vanderbilt really now, frankly, has two hometown kids between him and Jared Curtis is really the faces of probably the whole athletics program at this point. And it's pretty remarkable what he's been able to do, and he is that presence, off the court. I think he's Diego Pavia had his own presence off the court where everybody knew who he was. I think Tanner has that, but he has it maybe in a little bit of a different way in the sense that, Pavia's, outgoing nature and really, enthusiastic about everything and can create kind of a scene sometimes for good and for bad. Maybe Tanner doesn't have that much, but he's kind of really carving his own path to being a star of Vanderbilt athletics and at the forefront. And I think, that's a really valuable thing too. And, we've seen in programs across the country and even in Vanderbilt in years past, you have guys, I mean, not to point fingers at last season, but I think, Jason Edwards put up similar points, similar offensive value, if not more. He was up towards 20 points a game, if I remember correctly. He never really had, I think, the impact on the fans that maybe Tyler Tanner is having. And I don't know if you agree or disagree there, Joey, but I think that's a good example of putting in perspective what Tanner is doing and the fact that again he came in as a true freshman. He's a hometown kid, and now he's really made the changes he needed to make to evolve into this, star on, by the way, a top 10 basketball team in the nation. And maybe that might segue us a little bit away from Tanner and into everything else going on with Vanderbilt basketball. But I think that's important to cover as well, Joey. So I'm glad you brought up the fact of his presence off the court as well.
Yeah, before we segue,
Yeah.
here's what I think makes him different than other stars, and here's why he's so endearing to people around Vanderbilt. He knows everybody's name. He shakes hands with old ladies in the stands. He takes a second away from talking to his parents in the stands to go greet people who, I mean, are community members and who have been there for the whole ride. I think that's a big deal. It's almost like if Diego Pavia had stayed in New Mexico. Like that's what Tyler Tanner is to me, where it's not only the hometown hero thing, it's the thing that he's actually part of the community that he is within. And I think that's a big deal. And that's something that I should note in that story that maybe I haven't yet as well. And I guess to bring it all home and to kind of compare Tanner's personalities to some others, I think the endearing part about Tyler Tanner is he still gets nervous to go in the press conferences and say something stupid, and his parents still get nervous before the games. I mean, that's Tyler Tanner for you. Like Tyler Tanner cares about people. He cares about um, being a representative for this program and how he's supposed to do that. And I think that's what makes Tyler Tanner such a special presence for this program. Mark Byington, I think, has described him as like the nicest person on the planet, him and Mason Nicholson. So take that for what it's worth. But I mean, that's Tyler Tanner in a nutshell. And I think it was important that we kind of declared him what he is at this point, which is a transcendent star for this program. They've had some really good players over the years. We had one of them on the show on Monday last week, and I don't know if any of them have been as recognizable within this fan base and have had as many people gravitate towards them as Tyler Tanner. And a big piece of that is them winning. They're 16 and 0. One more win gets them the best start in program history. One of, I think, five undefeated teams in college basketball at this stage. Dylan, Michigan fell. Duke is falling. Gonzaga is falling. Vanderbilt is one of the five last standing teams, though. Arizona, Nebraska, Vanderbilt, and let's see the rest. Miami of Ohio, and then I'm missing one that is really high in Ken Palm, and I shouldn't be missing here. Iowa State, of course, Iowa State. Um, but man, Dylan, just they have a chance to really make. I mean, if they win this week, they have a chance to be the last team standing, honestly. I mean, Nebraska, I think, has two easier games this week. Iowa State, I would guess, probably stays undefeated. They have Kansas, which Kansas is always tough, but they're going on the road too, which is difficult, but they are favored in that game. Cincinnati, they have an 85% chance to beat, according to Ken Palm. Cincinnati is obviously down this year. Arizona State and UCF are Arizona's opponents. Would assume they'll beat both of them. Things get more difficult for both of them after this week, though. Kind of a similar story with Nebraska. They play Oregon and Northwestern this week. Both games they have above a 65% chance to win. And then Minnesota, I think, is the next one that I kind of have circled as a really difficult game for Nebraska. And then they get Michigan after that. But point being, Dylan, if they win this week, which they have a below 50% chance per Ken Palm of winning both games, they could be in some even more rare air here as they look to be the last team standing undefeated.
Yeah, and they've got a tough little schedule coming up. They're at Texas on Wednesday. This is a Texas team that just beat Alabama after Vanderbilt, beat them as well earlier in the week, but they beat them at home, obviously. So this all signs point to that being a pretty tough road game. It's kind of, I think, first real road test. They played South Carolina on the road, but and then they come home Saturday to play Florida, which is also not an easy game at all. Florida lost to Mizzou, but they came back, they beat Georgia, and then they just blew Tennessee out of the water. So these are two good teams they have this week. Um, I would agree with Ken Palm that the odds of them winning both are probably below 50, but at the same time, they'll probably be favored in both games, I would think. I know as of last week, they were actually favored, according to Ken Palm, in every single one of its remaining games, or they were projected to be. I wouldn't anticipate that have changed for any reason, considering they won both their games. So I think for sure, I think for sure they will be tested as they come up on the schedule. And I'm just looking at the schedule now. It definitely gets tricky as they go. Um, they have Tennessee twice in the last 3 weeks. That'll be tricky. But this team has what are they, 16-0 now, 15-0? They're
Yeah.
15-0. So Alabama was probably one of, if not their hardest test, Joey, and now they've got especially this week, some important games ahead of them. But I think this will be a nice little break from them. The fact that they have what from now until Saturday until Wednesday. Um, Not that Mark Byington talked a lot about how they were pretty drained on Saturday against LSU from Wednesday's game with Alabama, high intensity game. It was really hot in the gym. Um, but they came back. They rebounded back nicely. So we'll see if they start to get some tired legs. Maybe rotate some more guys in. Mike James played, I think, 15 minutes against LSU, which was by far his season high. So we'll see. We'll see how they counteract that. But that's definitely the gauntlet of sorts up ahead of them, as it always is in the SEC in basketball, Joey.
Yeah, I actually think, and this is going to be an unpopular take, I would guess that in the next week or two they get taken down.
Yeah.
And it's just so hard at this point. You got Texas, who, Dylan, I think Texas is actually a sneaky game for them in that Texas has so many guys that can get to the foul line. They're number one in the country in getting to the foul line. And that's obviously been an issue for Vanderbilt's front court, particularly McLaughlin and Washington. It's not necessarily a trap game, so I think Vanderbilt knows the task at hand there, but that's a game where I could see them getting taken down. And it is weird. Like, I think if Vanderbilt can get past this week, it's got a chance to be the last team standing. However, I think everybody else really has a pretty easy week. If we're being honest here, Miami of Ohio, who is one of the five as well, has Central Michigan ranked 317th in Ken Palm, 95% chance for them to win that game. And then Buffalo later in the week, it's got an 81% chance. The next time they'll lose would be Kent State, uh, who it only has a 60% chance at beating, and they have to play that game on the road. But I'm just looking at it like Arizona's going to beat Arizona State. I don't think Arizona State is really anything. UCF, we saw UCF play against Vanderbilt, and I think some natural regression is coming there for them, even though they did beat Kansas in the last few weeks. And then Nebraska, I think, will probably get through the week as well. Oregon, I think, is a more difficult test than Northwestern, honestly, even though they are. Uh, Ken Palm has them with a much better chance to beat Oregon. I still think I'm a little more worried about Oregon than Northwestern at this point after Northwestern lost to Rutgers last night. It's not to say that Vanderbilt can't do it or that it's an indictment on them, but it just looks like the path here is a little bit difficult to be the last unbeaten team. But I guess if you're looking for a silver lining here, it's always going to be difficult. And Vanderbilt had a less than 7% chance to get here being undefeated per Evan Mia. We'll see what happens, but just for context, they do have the hardest road this week out of any of the undefeated teams left. It's weird, the schedule kind of lets up for all those teams this week, and it really ramps up for Vanderbilt.
Yeah, for sure. It's a tough schedule ahead of them coming up, and I think it'll be interesting to see how Byington, and his team rebounds. And I bring up Byington because I think we maybe gloss over a little bit that aspect of this story, the fact that you know Mark Byington came in last season and he had what, a month or two to like assemble a roster, like a mess of a roster in the
Mhm.
sense that he basically had nothing to work with. And he not only did that, but he managed to get, two pretty highly touted recruits in Jason Edwards and AJ Hogard, and then he, took him to the tournament, the NCAA tournament, and it was very clear. You never said this or anything. You can never tell if you didn't really understand Byington, but that wasn't the type of team he wanted, and we talked about this in the preseason, Joey, but um he was able to do that with a team that was basically, forced onto him, in the
Mhm.
sense of how he wanted them to play. He couldn't run the offense he wanted to run with that personnel. And now he had a full year in the portal to actually go get the players he wanted to. And I think you're seeing how, like, this is one of the better coaches in the entire country, Joey. And if Vanderbilt wants to keep him after this season, they're going to need to pay him a lot because he's going to be very highly touted among a lot of the blue bloods, depending on how the rest of the season goes. But to see how he's gone out there and gotten the guys that he needed to run his scheme, and then how he's executed it pretty flawlessly up to this point, especially, on the offensive end. I think that part can't go under the radar either. And you have to give a lot of credit to Byington and his coaching staff because the truth, they don't have a Jason Edwards. And maybe Tanner and Miles are pretty close to it, but a guy who can go out there or who will go out there and consistently put up, 22 points per game or be, your guy who takes like 18 shots every game and can be your volume scorer. Like every single set they run on offense is designed is specifically designed for some kind of executed play. It's very rare that you see just like ISO ball with like, oh, we'll just give it a Tanner and let him work something. Even when that's the game plan, there's some kind of scheme drawn up to get someone else open, and I think that deserves a ton of credit too, Joey, and to see what he's doing. It's also a crazy story with Kurt Cignetti and Indiana football and what they're doing at the same time, considering both Cignetti and Byington were coaching in James Madison at the same time just a couple years ago. So I just didn't want to let that fly under the radar either, and to see what he's done with not only some of the individual players and the leaps they've taken, but also how he's kind of found this team that he wanted and he knew would work together under his scheme, and he's executed it pretty well so far.
Yeah, here's one stat along the Jason Edwards lines. And before I say this, I'm going to preface this like I I have a soft spot for Jason based off of what he went through and what he did to get here. And I think he's one of college basketball's best stories just because of what he went through to get here, because of how he overcame so much to get here. That being said, Duke Miles deciding to let Jason Edwards walk and to not make the investment in him that I think a lot of people thought Vanderbilt should have made at the time, and deciding to reinvest that in Duke Miles for less and to even add some on top of Duke Miles with that money, that might have been the best decision Vanderbilt made all offseason. And I
Yeah.
think they knew it pretty quickly after the St. Mary's game. I had heard like the next day that that was about it for Jason Edwards at Vanderbilt. And there was some negotiating after that, and you hear some figures thrown around at that point that are just astronomical. Um, Dylan, that was not what Vanderbilt needed anymore. And I think Jason Edwards is probably a more dynamic scorer than Duke Miles. We'll
Agreed.
say that, right? But look at the numbers this year. Duke Miles averaging 17.2 points a game. It's actually the same as what Edwards is averaging at Providence. Edwards averaged 17 a night last year, though. Um, Jason Edwards averaged 1.3 assists per game. Duke Miles is averaging 4.4. Duke Miles is shooting at 47% from the field. Jason Edwards shot at 43. It's just a complete upgrade in terms of how you want to play. And again, like Jason Edwards is probably a more dynamic scorer than Duke Miles is. But Dylan, like you said, the actions they run and the way they want to play, I think just caters so much more to Duke Miles. And I think Byington just kind of had to deal with some of the stuff that they had to deal with making Edwards one of their guys last year. And Edwards was relatively consistent. Duke Miles, I think, is even more consistent, though. The only game in which Duke Miles scored less than 10 points this year was the Central Arkansas game when he scored six, and they didn't need him to have a whole lot of points that night. They were pushed a little bit in that game, but they didn't need Jason Edwards or Duke Miles to carry the load that night. I
Yeah.
think it's just been incredibly impressive to see what Duke Miles has done. And no slight on Jason Edwards here. I think that was one of the better moves they made all offseason. And that's what you have to do. Like, you can't always keep all your best players.
Yeah.
And I think Mark Byington, he didn't learn that the hard way, but I think he learned last year that Jason Edwards was good enough to carry him through that 1 year, and they needed a change. And I think Jason wanted a change too at some point, right? I think Jason really liked Vanderbilt, but I also think Jason Edwards needed to go to a place where he was going to be able to do what he did at Vanderbilt last year. And I don't think that's what Vanderbilt wanted anymore. I think they wanted to move on and do something different. And Providence still hasn't really turned the corner with Edwards kind of leading the way. Vanderbilt has turned the corner with Duke Miles and Tyler Tanner running the show. And I
Yeah.
don't know if they're putting the ball in Hogard and Edwards' hands again, or even just Edwards' hands this year. I don't know that we see what we've seen from Tanner. So, not to rag on Jason, I do like Jason. I think he's a he's a person that I've always had a soft spot for, like I said, but just being objective, like this was a great move for them making that trade.
Yeah, and that's not even to mention the defensive impact, right? I mean, Edwards was
Right.
not really didn't have much of an impact on the defensive end. I wouldn't say he was a total liability there. But Duke Miles has been an impact player on both sides, and I agree with you. I nagged on Edwards a little bit earlier as well, but he deserves a ton of credit for what he did to, you talk about we talk a lot about it with football, how like last year, when they beat out, like that was the turning point, like of that program. Like I think when you look back on it, them making the tournament last year after the seasons they had, especially the season right before it that they had, I think that's really your turning point, and Edwards deserves a ton of credit for that. So agree with your point on that, Joey. But yeah, I mean, men's basketball now in a really good shape, and we don't have time to fully get into the front court, but I think AK Okereke is coming into his own a lot. He was a guy that I was watching the game on Saturday, and he seemed like a really strong presence in the post, especially offensively. I think we've known he has that defensive talent. I've said all along, I wouldn't be surprised if he is a guy who peaks later. He peaks in conference play, kind of like the Chris Mannion path, what he did last season. I
Mhm.
actually think that those players aren't entirely dissimilar. Although I think Okereke is better, has more, straight talent, and he's obviously bigger as well. But I think we've seen a lot of improvement from Okereke and Jalen Washington too. There were a lot of questions about um, can he be that interior defender that Vanderbilt kind of needs. And I think he's answered the call so far. So those are two more of my points in the front court. I think we know what we're getting in the backcourt now, and it's one of the best backcourts in the entire country. So the question is how the rest of the roster rounds out. But yeah, both men's basketball and a quick shout out to women's basketball as well are both top 10 in the AP poll as of today, Monday. It's an exciting time on the hardwood at Memorial, Joey, and I'll let you bring us home. But yeah, a lot to look forward to if you're a Vanderbilt basketball fan these days, especially with the schedule coming up and the state of the team being 16-0, both teams being 16-0 actually.
Yeah, interesting that you bring up the front court there. I think we're going to learn a lot about the front court this week.
Yeah,
At Texas, it's can you avoid being in foul trouble the whole night? Can you be available enough to help Vanderbilt win the game on Tuesday or on Wednesday night? I think that's maybe the bigger test that they're going to face this week is can those guys stay out of foul trouble on Wednesday and on Saturday? Saturday they're playing against maybe the best front court in the country. Three guys who won a national championship last year: Alex Condon, Micah Handlogden, Ruben Chinyelu. I mean, three guys who are unlike anything Vanderbilt has seen, really. You're going to learn a heck of a lot about the longevity of this team this week. And it's not to say that if they can't handle Florida's front court, that they're not going to make a run. I mean, who can stop Florida's front court? But if they can hold their own, that tells me that it doesn't really matter what matchup they get in the tournament. Like they can win if they play their best. If they lose to Florida by maybe a significant amount, if they get pummeled on the glass, then I'm kind of looking at it and saying, well, they need a different matchup in the tournament than a team that can do that to them. We're going to learn a little bit about their longevity, a little bit about the draw they need in March Madness this week. A really exciting week if you're a Vanderbilt basketball fan to learn something about this team. And we're not going to try to take away from the start or anything along those lines, but uh, we'll have a lot of coverage coming this week of everything that we learn about this team. So, for Dylan Tovitz, I'm Joey Dwyer. Thank you guys for watching. God bless, and check out the Tyler Tanner story on the site tomorrow. We'll talk soon. Peace.
and subscribe to the
And
YouTube channel.
subscribe. We need you to subscribe. We need to say that more. We that was like our mandate, Dylan.
Yeah.
I told the staff meeting like we need to subscribe, and I don't do it. So congratulations to Dylan. Maybe you get a lollipop or something. I don't know.
All right. Thank you guys
Thank
for
you guys for
watching.
watching. God bless.